The soft glow of London's evening lights fades into the distance as the clock strikes 11 past the hour, casting long shadows across the historic stones of the Mall. For centuries, the rhythmic beating of the heart of the British realm has been synchronized with the steady, predictable routines of its ancient institution. A structure built on the invisible foundation of duty, tradition, and unspoken agreements. It is a world where the public is treated to grand spectacles, magnificent pageants, and calculated displays of unity, only for the true machinery of state to turn quietly behind closed doors once the banners are folded away. This week was no different, as the capital witnessed the splendid choreography of annual traditions, from the precision of military parades to the elegance of royal enclosures, all punctuated by the joyful celebration of a high society wedding that perfectly framed the image of a modern, harmonious dynasty. Yet, as the final notes of the brass bands faded and the elite retreated to their country estates, an unprecedented disclosure was quietly slipped into the public domain, carrying with it a profound shift that alters the nation's relationship with its sovereign forever. This revelation did not come with the blare of trumpets or a formal address from the balcony, but rather nestled deep within the cold, clinical lines of the annual financial accounts, a traditional dumping ground for news the establishment prefers to manage with quiet discretion. To understand the gravity of what has just transpired, one must look past the dry figures and the complex ledgers to find a truth that completely rewrites a 200-year-old narrative of royal life. If you want to stay informed about the hidden shifts shaping global institutions and receive deep insights into the traditions that govern our world, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and join our growing community before we delve deeper into this unfolding story. For generations, the British public and observers worldwide have operated under a shared understanding of what constitutes the ultimate symbol of the realm, a physical anchor for the identity of the state itself. The grand facade that looks out over the Victoria Memorial has stood as a silent witness to history, a backdrop for moments of national triumph, profound grief, and monumental transition. Tourists from every corner of the globe gather outside its iron gates, looking up at the sky to see which flag is flying from the mast, believing that just beyond those thick stone walls, the daily rhythm of a family home is playing out in the traditional fashion. There is a deep, comforting myth embedded in the collective consciousness that the individual who wears the crown also inhabits the grandest address in the capital, walking the same corridors as the legendary figures of the past. But tonight, that long-cherished illusion has been systematically dismantled by a formal declaration that turns an open secret into an unyielding, permanent reality. The official statement confirms that the current monarch and his consort have made a definitive choice regarding their future, establishing a precedent that breaks entirely from the path trodden by their predecessors since the mid-19th century. They have formally announced that they will never establish their personal residence within those historic walls, choosing instead to relegate the massive complex to the status of a ceremonial centre, a workplace for hundreds of administrative staff, and a national heritage site. This is not a temporary arrangement or a minor adjustment due to ongoing maintenance, but a permanent philosophical departure from a tradition that survived the Blitz, outlasted economic depressions, and defined the Victorian and Windsor eras. To the casual observer, it might seem like a practical logistical decision, a mere technicality in a world that requires greater efficiency and less indulgence. But to those who study the symbolic language of the realm, it represents a seismic fracture. For nearly 2 centuries, ever since an 18-year-old queen moved her court into the grand building. In 1837, the palace and the person of the sovereign were treated as one and the same. It was the place where the monarch lived, slept, ate and raised families, creating a powerful domestic anchor that humanized the immense power of the crown. By removing the domestic element from the palace, the institution risks transforming a living, breathing symbol of the nation into a hollowed-out corporate headquarters, a beautifully preserved museum that functions more as a commercial enterprise than the home of a living sovereign. The decision has sent a subtle but unmistakable tremor through the cultural landscape, forcing a re-evaluation of what the crown intends to represent in this new era. While the palace insists that the building will remain a buzzing hive of official activity, hosting investitures, foreign dignitaries, and state banquets, the loss of its residential status changes its very essence. It alters the imaginary connection that everyday people feel when they stand outside the gates, knowing that the rooms inside are no longer a home but merely an office building draped in historical luxury. This profound shift has been accompanied by other unprecedented disclosures, including the highly unusual publication of a personal tax bill designed to project a new era of absolute transparency and modern accountability. The numbers released are staggering, detailing millions paid into the public treasury since the accession, an act clearly intended to win favor with a public increasingly sensitive to the expenses of its traditional institutions. Yet, this display of financial openness has done little to overshadow the psychological impact of the residential abandonment, which critics view as a retreat from the traditional expectations of the role. For decades, the current monarch has enjoyed the comfort and refined luxury of his longtime London home, just a short walk down the road. An elegant residence transformed by the exquisite taste of the late Queen Mother. Filled with invaluable art, rare antiques, historic fireplaces, and beautifully manicured private gardens, it offers a level of warmth, privacy, and domestic peace that the massive, sprawling palace could never provide. The choice to remain there is entirely understandable from a human perspective, especially for an individual navigating the later years of life, while quietly managing significant health challenges behind the scenes. It is a rational, practical choice made by a modern couple who prefer a genuine home over an overwhelming complex of 775 rooms, dozens of state apartments, and nearly 100 offices. But royal life has rarely been about personal comfort or rational choices. It has always been about the endurance of the symbol, the willingness to inhabit the myth for the sake of continuity and public reassurance. By choosing personal preference over historic precedent, the current leadership has initiated a quiet revolution that may inadvertently weaken the vital links that hold the entire structure together in the eyes of the public. The sheer scale of the estate that the sovereign has chosen to abandon as a personal residence is almost impossible to comprehend without examining the staggering logistics that keep it functioning day after day. This colossal monument to imperial history spans over 775 individual rooms, a vast labyrinth that includes 19 grand state apartments, 52 principal royal and guest bedrooms, 188 staff bedrooms, 92 corporate offices, and 78 fully functioning bathrooms. The physical dimensions alone are breathtaking, measuring 108 meters across the imposing front facade, 120 meters in depth, and rising 24 meters into the grey London sky. It is essentially a self-contained sovereign city hidden behind ornamental iron gates, a massive community that requires a permanent workforce of approximately 800 dedicated professionals to maintain its daily operations. From its own private post office and specialized medical clinic to a private cinema and a historic swimming pool built in 1938 so the young princesses could learn to swim, the complex is a sprawling empire of administrative and domestic power. Yet, despite this unparalleled luxury, the truth that has slowly emerged from historical records and internal whispers is that the palace has rarely been loved by the people forced to inhabit it. The late Queen herself famously viewed her private quarters within the massive stone structure as little more than a flat above the shop, a clinical corporate headquarters where she conducted the grueling business of state rather than a place of true domestic comfort. It was a workspace where the endless paperwork of government boxes arrived daily, surrounded by hundreds of staff members, military aides, and visiting dignitaries, leaving almost no room for the quiet intimacy of a genuine family life. This long-standing detachment reached a permanent breaking point during the global health crisis of 2020, when the late monarch departed the capital a week before the national lockdown, choosing the historic security of Windsor as her sanctuary, and never spending another night under the palace roof. That final, quiet departure was actually the late correction of a historical mistake that began more than 7 decades earlier, when a young, grieving princess was suddenly thrust onto the throne following the unexpected passing of her father in the winter of 1952. At that delicate moment in history, the young queen and her husband were deeply happy living in the refined comfort of Clarence House, a beautiful home they had meticulously renovated to suit their young family. They desperately wished to remain there, recognizing that the massive palace was too cold, too formal, and too exposed to serve as a proper environment for raising their children. However, the iron will of the political establishment, embodied by a forceful and traditionalist prime minister, intervened with absolute authority, insisting that historical precedent must override personal preference. The government argued that because the sovereign had resided at the traditional palace since the dawn of the Victorian era, any deviation would signal a weakness in the continuity of the state, effectively forcing the reluctant young family to pack their belongings and move down the mall. That historical struggle highlights the immense tension between the personal desires of the individuals who inhabit the crown and the unyielding expectations of the public they serve. For generations, the palace was carefully marketed to the world as the ultimate family home, a symbol of domestic stability that stood firm even during the darkest days of the Second World War. When the late King George VI and the Queen Mother refused to abandon the capital during the height of the bombardment, choosing to share the dangers of the Blitz with their citizens, they cemented the building's status as a sacred emblem of national resilience. That carefully crafted image is precisely why the current announcement feels so jarring to a nation built on historical continuity, as it represents a formal surrender of the very heart of the monarchy's symbolic geography. While the palace organizers attempt to soften the blow by issuing detailed briefings claiming the complex will remain a working home, critics have been quick to point out the logical fragility of such a claim. To suggest that a massive historical monument remains a home when absolutely no member of the royal family actually resides within its walls stretches the boundaries of public credibility, threatening to replace authentic tradition with corporate spin. This debate over what truly constitutes a royal home takes on an even sharper, more dramatic edge when viewed against the intense speculation surrounding the imminent return of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to the United Kingdom. Reports have circulated through highly informed channels, suggesting that the monarch has quietly offered his younger son and his family an apartment within the secure confines of the palace during their upcoming summer visit. It is a striking irony that the very building the senior members of the family are formally abandoning could become the temporary sanctuary for the two individuals who have spent years launching bitter public criticisms against the institution. Long-time royal observers have noted with a sense of profound astonishment that if these logistical arrangements are confirmed, the capital's most iconic royal building could soon be occupied exclusively by the non-working members of the dynasty who chose to walk away from their official duties. This creates an incredibly surreal narrative dynamic, where the central fortress of the state, a building that no senior Windsor wishes to call home, transforms into the exclusive London base for the family's most controversial figures. The fortress-like security of the complex, often described as the safest urban location in the entire country, makes it the only practical environment where the complex security requirements of the returning family can be guaranteed without igniting a public debate over policing costs. Yet, the imagery of the Sussexes establishing a foothold in the very heart of the capital, while the King and Queen retreat to the private luxury of their preferred estates, creates a striking visual metaphor for the fragmented state of the modern family. It exposes a deep contradiction within the palace's public relations strategy, which attempts to project absolute financial transparency on one hand, while managing complex back-channel family negotiations on the other. This tension is further complicated by the staggering rise in institutional expenditure revealed in the latest accounts, which show total spending climbing to over £132 million. A massive increase driven largely by extensive environmental and structural renovations across the estate. The institution has faced intense scrutiny over these figures, attempting to justify the massive layout by pointing to the critical state of repair into which the historic structures had fallen over decades of neglect. For years, the palace was riddled with structural vulnerabilities, with ancient plumbing, decaying wiring, and falling plaster that once narrowly avoided injuring senior members of the family, alongside persistent pest problems that plagued the staff quarters. The current leadership has utilized a significant influx of revenue from maritime energy projects to fund a massive multi-year engineering overhaul designed to preserve the national heritage asset for future generations. But as the physical stones of the palace are meticulously restored and modernized at immense public expense, the human presence that once gave those stones their symbolic meaning is fading away, leaving behind a magnificent, high-tech corporate office that risks losing its connection to the cultural imagination of the ordinary citizens who pay for its upkeep. This structural transformation of the world's most recognizable royal residence comes at a critical juncture for the individuals tasked with steering the ancient ship of state through the turbulent waters of the 21st century. To fully grasp why this departure from tradition matters, one must examine the personal histories, underlying motivations, and changing circumstances of the key figures involved in this historic transition. At the center of this narrative stands a monarch who has spent his entire life preparing for the supreme office, a highly complex individual who has now reached the throne at an advanced age while facing profound personal health trials. Born in the late 1940s, the sovereign grew up under the immense shadow of the late Queen, witnessing firsthand the heavy emotional toll that unyielding adherence to institutional duty can exact on a family. Throughout his decades as the heir apparent, he cultivated a unique philosophy of public service, often clashing with traditionalists by championing progressive environmental causes, organic agriculture, and radical architectural theories long before they entered the cultural mainstream. His deep attachment to his current residence, which he inherited after the passing of his beloved grandmother in 2003, reflects his lifelong desire for an environment tailored to his personal aesthetic values and intellectual pursuits. It is a home where he can surround himself with carefully curated art collections, walk through organic vegetable gardens, and find solace from the crushing weight of public scrutiny. From a human perspective, it is entirely natural that a 77-year-old individual undergoing intensive modern medical treatments would choose the sanctuary of a cherished, comfortable home over the drafty, echoing state apartments of an imperial fortress. The palace administration has gone to extraordinary lengths to emphasize that the monarch's workload has not been diminished by his ongoing health journey, pointing aggressively to a dense calendar of official meetings, credentials ceremonies, and public appearances as definitive proof of his enduring vitality. This aggressive public relations campaign is designed to send a clear message to the domestic public and international observers that the leadership remains steady, focused, and fully capable of executing its constitutional responsibilities. Yet, while this display of personal resilience is genuinely admirable and offers comfort to families navigating similar health struggles, the long-term institutional consequences of his choices cannot be overlooked. By formally abandoning the traditional palace, the current leadership is inadvertently accelerating a profound shift in public perception, trading a deeply rooted national myth for the cold efficiency of a corporate model. For nearly 2 centuries, the physical presence of the living sovereign inside that specific building served as a powerful, unspoken contract between the crown and the populace, a visual guarantee that the person who held the highest office in the land lived among the people, sharing the same physical landscape of the capital. When that link is severed, the grand building risks becoming nothing more than a highly commercialized tourist attraction, a beautifully preserved backdrop for postcards, and changing of the guard ceremonies that no longer holds a living soul. This shift becomes even more problematic when viewed alongside the dramatic decline in domestic public approval ratings that has unfolded over the initial years of the current reign. Historical data reveals a steady, concerning erosion of support, with core institutional approval numbers dropping from a secure 65% to a highly vulnerable 55% within a remarkably short period. For any modern democratic institution, such a rapid downward trajectory would represent an existential crisis, signaling a dangerous disconnect from the younger demographic groups who increasingly view the traditional structures as archaic, costly, and irrelevant to their daily lives. The decision to reject the traditional home simply because it does not align with personal preferences risks alienating the very traditionalists who have formed the bedrock of institutional support for generations. Individuals who believe that the crown must always prioritize historical precedent over personal comfort. This vulnerability is further intensified by the ongoing saga surrounding the younger branch of the family, whose complex, highly public interactions with the palace continue to generate immense domestic and international intrigue. The potential return of the exiled prince and his family to the capital, and the rumors of their impending temporary residence within the abandoned palace, introduces a bizarre twist to the entire narrative. For years, these individuals have utilized global media platforms to critique the inner workings of the dynasty, presenting a narrative of institutional coldness and personal isolation that deeply damaged the reputation of the state both at home and abroad. If they are indeed granted a secure sanctuary within the capital's most iconic building, it would create an unprecedented, highly ironic situation where the central fortress of the state is occupied exclusively by the non-working members of the family who chose to walk away from their public obligations. It would expose the deep human fractures that run beneath the polished surface of the institution, demonstrating that despite the elaborate public pageantry and the appearance of unified strength, the family remains deeply divided over its core identity and future direction. The coming weeks will undoubtedly reveal whether these delicate back-channel arrangements will manifest into reality, or whether the current rumors are merely another chapter in the endless, sophisticated media war that has defined the family's modern existence. Ultimately, the decision to transform the capital's historic palace into a grand corporate office represents a definitive conclusion to an era that began with the youthful optimism of the early Victorian age. It marks the final transition of a living, breathing symbol into a historical artifact, a change that reflects the pragmatic, fragmented nature of our contemporary world. As the grand flag continues to fly over the empty stone facade, it serves as a silent reminder that while the physical structures of power can be meticulously restored and maintained at immense public expense, the magic, the myth, and the deep emotional connections that once gave those structures their true authority are far more fragile, easily dissolved by the choices of a single generation.